In this lesson, we will start adding shading to the walls and the floor slabs. So the main element by far is to add a darker color to the walls that are being cut through. So this will add the most amount of understanding to what the spaces really are and how they are enveloped. So to do this, let's start by adding a new layer, and we can immediately relayer it or rename that layer to simply walls. What you can also do is you can start adding groups and folders underneath your or into your layer manager. So let's create a new group by clicking that icon. This one is going to be called CAD, and I'm just going to select all of the CAD files and shift them into that group. So I generally like to have this quite organized from the beginning, since you will have inevitably quite a lot of layers that are going to be individually layered on top of each other, and if you have that order in place, just like we did with the AutoCAD file, your workflow will be much quicker and much simpler. So into the walls layer, what we need to do is we need to find out which layer we need to start working with, and that's going to be this CAD layer. So we can zoom into a portion of it, and we can now start to use the eyedropper tool, so the magic wand rather, not the eyedropper, and start selecting the internal areas. Just make sure that contiguous is turned on, so that basically you are not selecting all the white on the entire drawing, but only the white that is limited to the boundaries of that wall that you are selecting. So once your walls are selected, you can do the columns at the same time. You may need to zoom in for some of those to be clearly visible. As you go up to your layer with the walls, you choose a color. Generally don't choose a solid black, try to go for a slightly grayer color so that you can still see the black outlines shining through and you get a little bit more depth in your tonality of your drawing. So with that, you can then turn off your selection and you can start to zoom in and to have a look how that is looking. If you like, it may often look better if you keep your CAD layers right at the top and you start doing all of the toning underneath, which means that you're not going to hide your actual black CAD layers by doing any shading on top. So what I'm going to do now is I'm quickly going to pause the video and I'm going to do the rest of the walls, and then I'm going to start the video when we start doing the floors. So now you can see that the walls have been completed, and the next step is to start looking at your floor surfaces. Now what you want to do is you want to think relatively abstractly about how you can identify the different floors and their uses. One of the things that we can immediately pick out is we have the pool with the internal pond over here, so that we can already tone as a light blue color. The next thing is we can tone all of the external terraces as a single color as well, which means that this terrace here, as well as this one as at the entrance, is going to have the same color. This is going to indicate to us that there is a similarity between these two areas, and it visually will make things much more easier to understand. Also, we have a couple of planters. We have an external planter and an internal one, so they can also have a slightly different color to identify that. Then we will try to get a single color for the entire interior, but we will have a slightly different tone by a very small degree for the garage, so that we can see that there is a difference in between living space and the more functional space back here. If you like to go the extra route, you can even symbolically go and choose to use a different color for all your service areas, so that you basically have a distinction between what are your primary living zones and what are your secondary garage and laundry and other bathroom areas. So those are different ways that you can start thinking about your plan. Always remember to be rather more conceptual instead of realistic, since you want your plan to speak in diagrams instead of a mentality of having a rendered plan effect to your drawings. So what I'm going to do to start this process is I'm going to go back up to my CAD layer, and I'm going to start selecting, using the magic wand again, those internal layers. You'll see though here that by dropping, or at least using the magic wand on this area, we have selected pretty much all of this. So then you will need to go to your marquee tool, and then just to deselect by holding down Alt on your keyboard, just deselect the areas that you don't want to include in your selection. So by doing so, I now only have this left. If I press Q, I can get a quick preview of what that mask is doing. I can zoom in here, and I can also just fine tune it if I need to. and here it may need to be slightly bigger. So I'm just going to move this up and increase that. So now we have that entire area. So instead of walls, I'm now going to make a different layer for each color of floor. So this one will be called floor garage, and I'm going to choose a color which is a very, very light tone, and those tones can then be changed at the end. I can make them much lighter if I need to. I just want to basically fill up areas that I can then go and manipulate later by doing either just increasing the opacity or actually changing the hue or saturation and all the rest. So here similarly, I will go back to my AutoCAD CAD layer. I will select that entire floor. I will select the other areas that are also included, the stairs. I can check what is included and what isn't, and I can basically go around and start adding all of these areas to my selection. Then the same thing happens with the marquee tool. You can just hold down Alt and deselect those areas that you don't want. And when you are ready with your selection, you can create a new layer, just as we've done for the garage. And this will be called floor. You can actually call it ground. And the same thing here with the color. We can just add a very light, unique color to that floor space. So what we've immediately done is we've demarcated the area that is for the garage. We have this living area here. We can also look at just fine-tuning this, since we want the doorways to be shown as well. We don't necessarily want this line to be there. These are, I think, the wipeouts, but we are still reading some of those lines through there. So we may need to even go back to the CAD package and just fine-tune that if we need to. But for the time being, you can also go and edit all of these things in Photoshop itself if you don't want to go back to CAD, by just hitting the backspace key and then doing all of those edits within Photoshop. That is entirely possible, and nothing wrong if you go and do that. Just remember that if you do this, you will still see some of these areas being white, since this is a wipeout. So the wipeout actually is quite an inconvenience for AutoCAD, because it reads a solid white instead of a complete transparent or opaque layer. So just remember that when you are using wipeout and Photoshop, is that you'll very often run into that issue where it will look correct to you when you print it out, but when you bring it into Photoshop, you will see those white areas. So now we have the entire floor for the living space. What we can do now is select the pool area as well as the area around the internal pond below the staircase, and we can now make another layer and call this water. And always try to use very faded and desaturated colors, since those are the ones that are going to look the most pleasing when you do your print. And remember that you can always just hit Control U, or you can go across to Image and then Hue Saturate in the adjustments, and you can just adjust some of those settings from there as well, so that you can get a better look for the water and the other elements. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing for the terrace. I don't think I need to re-show that, since the process is exactly the same. And in the next lesson, we're going to have a look at how we can do some interesting drop shadow quick tools to give us some more depth to these levels.